Hi guys, it's Julian today. I'm super excited to be back showing you how to make hard, ravey, trancey techno, sort of like that faster stuff that you're hearing from people like Viper, Diva, and then Verruf. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available at the top of the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. And let's get started. Alright, so right off the bat, we're at 140 BPM. You know, it's a bit faster, but that's a big part of the sound is the tempo. And the first sound that we have here is the reese bass. So yeah, you can hear it's a pretty simple chord progression where we're doing F minor, D sharp major, and then C sharp major, and then we jump up to these A sharp and G sharps there. And actually, that's a big thing, is like how that jumps like on that 8th note there. If I play it with the kick and the percussion, you can really hear like having that right like in between the kicks, where it's like no, no, no. Yeah, obviously my singing is great, but you can hear that works really well. Like, it makes this a bit more rhythmic, and it makes it so it's not just like a long droning sound, but it kind of fits into the track a bit better. So I definitely recommend playing with 8th notes for that. For the sound here, we have a pretty standard reese bass sound made with analog here. So you can see it's 2 saw waves, detuned a little bit. This is the classic reese, and then it's just going through a low pass filter. So there's no filter. And then with the filter, you can hear it just kind of cuts off some of those highs while still leaving in the nice crunchy mid-range. And then we just have the unison set like that. And then outside of the synth, we just have a bit of drum bus. You can hear that on there. It's like really fattening it up. So it's just this super powerful bass. Then we actually have a high pass filter because we do have a rumble kick. And so we need this to fit in with that. But then finally I just have a compressor side chaining into the kick. And with the kick, you can see I'm just doing it to the pre-effects. So it's just being side chained to the actual punch of the kick. Like just this. And not all the rumble on the end, because then you would never hear this. But yeah, then we have the pads. I'm actually going to play that with the bass. So you can hear what this pad is doing. It's actually just playing one note at a time. But then what it's doing is it's following the same rhythm as the bass line for the most part. And we're just getting like a lot of nice contrast between the different notes. Because it's like we're playing D sharp and C at the same time, for example. So right there, we're creating a C minor chord between those two. But the bass is much lower than the pad. So the bass is the thing that's playing the minor third there. So it's like you're getting these interesting chord shapes being created just by having the pad and the bass play at the same time. And just play slightly different parts that still fit together in the same scale musically, and you know, it still makes sense like that. This can create a very, very interesting layer for your tracks, because it's like, you know, especially if you start the track, like let's say you have like and then we get to the break. Like, you can hear the energy this adds if you just like kind of save this thing and then you bring it in later in the track. You can really get like just a cool thing happening there with the bass line. So for the sound with this one, it's made with wavetable. It's just 2 saw waves, detuned quite a bit, and then you can see I have the amp envelope set like that. And then we just have a ton of unison. You know, I've got 8 voices, the amount's on 51. Plus it's being detuned there. This needs to be really, really detuned in order for it to work right. Because it needs to be like a little bit kind of uneven between the bass and this pad. That's what's creating the texture that you're hearing. And yeah, then we have just a bit of reverb and some drum bus to fatten it up. Then I have a high pass filter, and then just a compressor. Side chaining this to the kick, same deal as before, where it's just the pre-effects kick, so it's the kick without the rumble on it. And yeah, then we have our lead. So this is just following the chord progression. Like if you play it with the bass line, you can hear it. These notes, all of those are the same as what the bass line is playing right there. And then we just have this melody up top that. So yeah, that's a really good technique here. Like when you're trying to write these kinds of like super trancey, like anthemic leads like this, having basically like one melodic line like this that's just like 2 or 3 notes. Like that's all this is. It's just those notes. Nothing really too crazy. But then what's happening is you're having those stay in the same place while the root notes are moving down. And it creates something that's really catchy, but still just like super big and anthemic. Now for the sound with this one, it is made using analog. So you can see we just have 2 saw waves, detuned with a bit of noise. And then the amp envelope is like that. And then we just have a bit of vibrato and unison. So as you can see, you know, the unison sounds are going to be very important here. Anytime you're trying to make something that's like trancey or kind of trance influenced, or even just sort of like that very like old school kind of anthemic feel that isn't always, you know, exclusive to trance. Just the unison is just a really good way to make your synth super big and fat. And you can also just get creative with it too, like, you know, just having these all detuned creates a much more interesting atmosphere than if they were all perfectly like in the same tuning. So the unison really helps with that. And the vibrato here, yeah, you can hear that, you know, just gives it that kind of more chorusy thing. Then we just have a bit of reverb, and I have my ultimate stereo widening rack on here as well, which I think I'll link the video describing that in the description. But yeah, I just have that like there's without it or with it. So you can hear what that does actually. It really brings this to life. Like it really opens the sound up, I feel like, and brings it like right to the front of the mix where it needs to be. And then we just have some drum bus to fatten it up a bit of high pass filter to make sure this doesn't get in the way of the low end, and then just a compressor side chaining this to that pre-effects kick. And that is the lead. Then we have the kick. So the way this kick is being made is it all starts with the sample, you know, you need like a really nice kind of like punchy sort of techno kick like this. So I have this one that I made, and then what we're doing is I'm just putting it through the rumble, and then we have it being drum bust, and then I have a limiter as well, which I'll explain. So the way this rumble rack works is you can see we have our dry chain, and then we have the wet chain with the rumble. So this is the rumble by itself. So all that's happening here is it's actually a pretty standard rumble. It just kind of comes down to how you process it with the reverb, and also like once we get to the end, which I'll talk about. So yeah, so it's just a bit of reverb. You can see I have the density turned up, and we have like a shorter decay time, shorter size. So, you know, it kind of creates more of like a thick bed of reverb rather than just like a you really want it to be full like that. And then we just have an amp, which as you can hear, brings out a lot of nasty frequencies, but it really brings out the low end. And then we just take that and low pass it. And then we have just our rumble. And then I'm also side chaining that to the dry kick so it won't get in the way. And then I have this EQ here, which just cuts out a bit of room for the kick. You know, this is actually a really good thing because typically your kick is going to punch at about 100 hertz. And honestly, you don't really want your rumble to have too much stuff at 100 hertz because it's going to get really messy with the kick. And also, that just isn't really where the like nice bass frequencies are. They're really more like down here. So we're just using that for that. and then it's cutting out 100 hertz and making room for the kick. And yeah, so then after that rack, we have this drum bus and this limiter. So here's without either of them. And with the drum bus. And then the limiter. So yeah, the first thing here, the drum bus, as you can hear, it just really fattens this up. You know, it's a great way to add some punch and fullness to the kick and the rumble at the end. And it really works to like glue them together too, you know, because if you have a kick and a rumble, you don't really want them to sound really side by side. Like a lot of times when I hear tutorials, it just kind of sounds like you're hearing the kick and the rumble as two separate things. But what you really want to do is treat them as one thing, you know, try to make them like really come together. And the best way to do that is just to do some saturation. And so that's what this drum bus is doing. And then I also have the transient knob turned up. So that's just punching it. And then again, just coming out of that, sounds like this. And you can hear, you know, the kick is, you know, the punch of the kick is there. Like, if we turned it up a bit, it would be nice. But the rumble isn't quite as, like, glued to the kick as I would like. So, that is where the limiter comes in. You can see we just have a little bit of limiting. I'm using, the look ahead is at 6 milliseconds. So, we actually have a pretty fast, or like a longer attack. So, it's not going to mess up the transient of the sound as much. But this is just to, like, really kind of pull that kick and the rumble together. And this is, like, one of those things. You know, you immediately hear the difference. It gives it that last little bit of push that was missing that you just, like, couldn't quite figure out how to get. This is a great way to do it. And yeah, this is something that some people might think is, like, you know, kind of messing up the dynamics. But honestly, like, it's not. Especially because, like, we're using it in a very controlled way. I'd say it's fine. You know, you can still hear the transient on the kick. It's like you have to use your ears. You can't just say, like, oh, like, this is a limiter, so I'm not going to use it here. Well, the limiter might sound great here, you know? So it's like, you really have to use your ears rather than just following, like, some guide that says to never touch a limiter. And yeah, that is the kick. Then we have the percussion. So I have all three of these in a group together just to kind of treat this as like one percussion loop, you know? And then we also have that hi-hat outside of the group. So the first thing we have here is this rave loop. Yeah, it's another one of those super classic sounding sort of like housey loops that you hear in a lot of these tracks. And a lot of tracks from like the 90s and 2000s too that these tracks are influenced by. This is one that I put together, and then I just have it in here, and this is one of those things, like, you really just have to use a loop. Like, you can't really, like, all this stuff that's happening is created by, like, multiple people having worked with these sounds and exported them and added things and processed them, like, in little increments over time, and then by the time it gets to you, there's so much, like, texture and stuff happening in it that, like, you really just have to preserve that and let that shine in the mix. Rather than trying to sit there with individual percussion sounds and recreate this, it's going to sound kind of off when you hear it in the track. Then we just have this hi-hat, which is really like a layer for this one. And you can hear that, like when I play that hi-hat too on its own, it feels a bit thin, and then we add in this hi-hat one. And you can hear like the fullness that it gives. So yeah, you just want something like that to kind of add some mid-range to your hi-hat. Make sure it's not just the frequencies, but also some. And then the last thing that we have inside of this percussion loop is the effects, which sound like this. So this is one of those loops like you hear in a lot of these tracks, and the idea behind this is it's very like stop and start. You know, you get it for this first quarter note here, and then you hear it at the end of the bar, and then starts again, stops, and then you hear it at the end of the bar. And that's the idea with this. It's like, if you had something like this just playing all the way through, it would be such a mess. But by having this just kind of like that, you know, kind of like, it's like it's picking it up and then it's putting it back down. It's a very like human thing. And the other thing here is that this adds like a bit of call and response to the track too. You know, call and response is really, really good in dance music, and especially techno. It can be everything. You know, it can really be the thing that takes a simple track from just a boring simple track to a really exciting track. And it's happening here because we get like, it's like it picks you up and then it lifts you down, like I was saying. So this thing is very important. And the other thing too is, you know, it just gives you something, like if we're playing like just this groove, like let's say your intro maybe starts like this. Then you get like a few minutes into the track. You know, it gives it something that makes it techno, and it's not just like all melodic trance vibes. You know, there's still something very aggressive and raw and underground to it. And so, this is going through a bit of processing, as you can see. So I'll just turn everything off and show you what it sounds like. And then we just put it through this pedal. As you can hear, does that first bit of distortion. Then we have some reverb. And then the overdrive, which really brings it to life. And then finally, I just have this auto pan, which is doing this sort of like quarter note volume bump thing where it makes it sound like it's being sidechained, basically. And yeah, then on the group of that percussion, we actually just have a bit of drum bus. So here's without that. And then with it. And this really speaks to, like, you know, if you just have solid sounds that are good already, you're not really going to have to do a whole lot. But you just do a little bit to glue them together, and it goes a really long way. So that's the idea with this. And yeah, then the last thing down here is just this hi-hat. You can hear it's like your standard sort of 909 style hi-hat. This is just meant to be in the high end, because if you just had that one that's in the percussion loop, you know, it would feel a bit odd, like when you get to the full energy in the track. But if we bring in this hi-hat, it soars really nicely on top of that. So yeah, and then that's just going through some saturation and a high-pass filter. And yeah, so that is going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available at the top of the description. It's a really, really great way to support me if you guys have been enjoying these videos. And yeah, thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.